The moment I knew I was screwed, I was elbow deep in server logs trying to duct tape our Frankenstein of a data pipeline back to life before the 6 a.m. metrics pulled another cardiac arrest. My phone buzzed with a calendar update titled Transition Alignment Check-in, which is Silicon Valley dog whistle for bring your badge and watch your back. And just like that, after 14 years of making magic out of mud, I had a bad feeling my ride on the Valon Systems clown car was about to end face first in a corporate dumpster. You ever spend a decade being the person everyone forgets until the coffee pot overflows or the customer dashboard starts spitting out nonsense like 99% of users live in Antarctica? That was me. Carolyn Lister, the fixer, the make it work girl. I kept the brittle guts of Valon's backend whispering sweet nothings into a dozen newer, shinier front ends with more buzzwords than brain cells. No glory, no bonuses, just the occasional, hey, thanks for catching that before it hit production, usually muttered 5 hours late and 2 levels above me. My official title was Senior Systems Integration Architect, which sounds fancy until you realize it meant babysitting a pile of deprecated APIs, duct taped to legacy infrastructure so fragile, sneezing too close to it could cause a rollback. I was the person who'd been here long enough to know which undocumented cron job updated the customer reports every night and which config file you never touched, unless you wanted payroll to send checks to Mars. Now here's the kicker. While the rest of the company played hot potato with agile transformations and horizontal synergies, I was the only reason their prized real-time analytics layer didn't crash every time someone opened Chrome. I'd built a workaround that let our ancient systems pretend they were cloud native. It was duct tape and prayers, but it worked. Hell, it thrived, and nobody knew how it ticked except me. No one wanted to know, until they didn't want me either. Quick pause here if you're still with me, and you're one of the 90% of folks listening without hitting that little subscribe button or tapping like, now would be a damn fine time to change that. It's the best kind of fuel for this storytelling fire, and it keeps my team caffeinated enough to keep dropping these bombs. So yeah, toss us a like. We earned it, promise. Anyway, back to the slow motion train wreck. It started with the new COO, Todd. Todd with the personality of a LinkedIn post and the spine of a wet napkin. He was the kind of guy who thought AI could replace half the org if he just said machine learning enough times into a budget spreadsheet. He'd been hired 6 months earlier to streamline operations before the acquisition. That's when the whispers began. Some mega conglomerate wanted Valon, not for its branding, not for its culture, for its tech, and more specifically, for our custom backend that somehow played nice with old banks, government vendors, and modern SAW dashboards without imploding. Of course, nobody said that last part out loud. Least of all Todd, who once asked me in a meeting, why are we still using this crusty old integration suite instead of something like Zapier? I blinked so hard my contact lens almost rolled into my brain. I said because, Todd, unlike Zapier, our system doesn't spontaneously combust when it sees a line of COBOL code. He laughed, not realizing I wasn't joking. He stopped inviting me to meetings after that. The real gut punch came when I noticed something off in our documentation portal. My access permissions were changing. Fewer edit rights. Admin logs getting locked behind multi-level approvals. When I asked our sysadmin, he just shrugged and mumbled something about leadership restructuring, which is HR speak for their lining up the guillotine. But here's the thing about being invisible for so long, you learn how to watch without being watched. So I started pulling old files, my employment agreement, contract amendments, vendor MSAs I'd signed off on back when I renegotiated that messy Oracle licensing deal in 2018. Most of it was boilerplate garbage, but then I found it, Clause 17b, buried like a cockroach in the footnotes of an exclusivity amendment from a third-party supplier. Something I'd negotiated myself back when our system was being audited for ISO compliance. The clause was clear. In the event of a sale, escrow funds tied to system continuity would not release without direct involvement or verified documentation from the original integration lead. Spoiler, that lead was me. 14 years. No promotions past mid-tier management. A severance package barely enough to replace the car battery I'd been ignoring for months. And yet, this one clause, this overlooked, legally binding breadcrumb, was about to become my ace in the hole. And Todd. He had no idea he was stepping into a buzzsaw shaped like a PDF. 2 weeks after Todd's grand entrance parade, complete with inspirational quote posters and a quarterly vision deck that used the word synergy like it was going out of style, we got the email. Subject line: Leadership Optimization Phase I, Forward Momentum. Translation: People are getting axed and titles are about to start sounding like startup Mad Libs. The new VP of Infrastructure, Devin, who looked like he'd been factory printed from a frat house vending machine, started showing up to meetings with slogans instead of solutions. The system practically runs itself now, he chirped one morning while sipping an oat milk latte and mispronouncing the name of our middleware tool. I stared at him across the conference room table. The system runs itself, I echoed back, deadpan, like I'd just heard my toaster say it could do my taxes. No one else laughed. They were too busy pretending to take notes on tablets that didn't even have the screens turned on. From that point forward, I became a ghost. Meeting invites stopped showing up. Shared folders locked me out one by one. I asked the director of IT what was going on and got a polite shrug and an it's above my pay grade look. I wasn't being let go yet, but it was like they'd flipped a switch that dimmed me out of existence. And the work? Still mine. Every time the self-running system had a hiccup, guess who got the Slack message at 10:30 p.m.? Me. Carolyn the ghost, still haunted by the code I'd written and patched and resurrected so many times I could name every subsystem like they were my kids. And maybe they were. I'd certainly spent more nights with those servers than with any man. But now I was watching these little 20-something warlords swagger around the office like they'd discovered fire, while the thing I'd built, held together by sheer experience and a dozen undocumented tricks, got passed around like a toy someone didn't know how to turn on. They didn't ask me about the acquisition. They didn't invite me to the architecture review, didn't even ask how the real-time reporting layer stayed in sync when the legacy database clock ran 5 seconds slow every third Wednesday. Hell, I was half convinced they thought Kubernetes was a kind of frozen yogurt. And yet, despite all that ignorance, they were making big moves. You could feel it in the way the finance team started working behind closed doors, in the uptick of requests from legal. The new Slack channel called #due diligence popped up one day, and I was notably not invited, which was hilarious considering most of what they'd be diligencing was stuff I designed with no formal documentation, only late-night post-it notes and coffee-fueled instincts. I didn't get mad. I got curious. Then I got methodical. I pulled my employment contract from the encrypted backup drive I'd maintained since my second year at Valon, part habit, part insurance policy. Main agreement was nothing special. Non-compete, at will employment, the usual. But I wasn't looking for the front page fluff. I was looking for the clause, a specific continuity provision I vaguely remembered tacking into a vendor exclusivity amendment years ago during a nightmare Oracle renegotiation. It was the kind of legal landmine nobody ever notices until it goes boom in a mahogany conference room. Took me 3 hours to find it. Clause 17b, page 22 of the amended Master Supplier Agreement, dated August 14, 2018. Titled, Escrow Retention Tied to System Continuity and Operational Oversight. It stated in the driest, most delicious legalese that if Valon were acquired, and the systems in question formed part of the sale's material value, then escrow funds associated with continuity would not be released until the original system's architect, as defined in Exhibit A, confirms transfer of operational knowledge in a form satisfactory to the acquiring party. I stared at that line for a full minute, heartbeat steady as stone. Then I opened Exhibit A. There it was, my name, Carolyn Lister, in black ink, plain as day. I saved a fresh copy, backed it up to 3 locations, one encrypted cloud drive, one USB stick in my freezer behind the peas, and one on a read-only partition of my mirrored system. Then I sat back in my chair, hands folded. They didn't want me in the room anymore? Fine. Let them close a $200 million deal without the keys to the kingdom. Let them explain to the buyers how they plan to transfer my undocumented workflows without, well, me. Let's see how far it runs itself gets you when the system suddenly starts asking questions no one knows how to answer. Let's see how much not essential costs when the ink hits the escrow clause. It was a Friday. Of course it was. They always do it on Fridays, like a magician's sleight of hand. Slice the limb, let the weekend bleed it out, and by Monday, everyone's already pretending you never existed. I was halfway through debugging a reporting error that only happened when a certain client's data hit the system at 12:01 a.m. UTC, what I called a gremlin tickle job, and I got the calendar ping, no subject line. Just meeting 2:00 p.m. HR Conf RM3. I stared at it for a second, then turned off my second monitor, just sat there, quiet still, watching the cursor blink like it was tapping out a countdown. The room was already set when I arrived. Round table, bottled water. HR manager I barely knew. Todd, of course, sitting with his usual oily calm, like this was a coffee chat and not a corporate guillotine. Carolyn, he said with a nod, thanks for joining on short notice. I sat. Todd launched into it like he was reading from a brochure. In light of the organizational shift ahead of our strategic transition, we've had to make some tough decisions regarding team structure and operational redundancies. Operational redundancies. I'd become a duplicate file, forgotten adapter cable in a drawer full of USB-C dreams. We've evaluated the systems you've overseen, Todd continued, and given that much of that infrastructure will not be directly impacted by the upcoming sale, we believe the time is right to sunset your role. Sunset. They even turned termination into a vacation postcard. HR slid a manila folder toward me. Inside, A single month's severance, subject to signing a non-disparagement clause. IP waiver and NDA so tight I'd barely be able to think about Valon without legal phantoms crawling out of the drywall. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just looked at the papers like they were written in a language for ghosts. Do you have any questions? Todd asked, hands folded like a televangelist. Just one, I said, calm as still water. Do you know what an access agreement is? He blinked. I not specifically know. I nodded slowly. Didn't think so, and then I stood. I didn't make a scene, didn't scream, didn't cry, just reached into my bag and pulled out a white envelope. On it, handwritten in block letters, transition plan, pending access agreement. I set it on the table. That's everything your team needs, I said, pending authorization, which, as you'll see, was never requested. HR opened her mouth, then closed it again. Todd looked at the envelope like it might bite. I unclipped my badge from my lanyard, set it on top of the folder, and walked out. My desk had already been emptied. Someone had done it before I even stepped into the room. The monitor was off. Keyboard unplugged. The tech version of a chalk outline. They'd wiped me out before the corpse was cold. As I walked down the hallway, I passed a few people who didn't even make eye contact. Others gave that awkward tight-lipped smile you give when someone just got kicked out of the tribe and you don't want to be next. But the worst was Jenna. She was new, maybe 6 months in. Sweet, a little green, always brought those protein bars that tasted like drywall but swore by them. She stopped in front of me, eyes wide. "They're really letting you go?" she whispered. "Apparently the systems run themselves now," I said, voice flat. "But you built half of it. Exactly half." I said, "The half they don't understand." I walked past her and didn't look back. In the elevator, I allowed myself one breath, one deep inhale to try and keep the shaking from starting. Not because I was afraid, no, that had passed hours ago. What I felt now was colder, deeper, like the ocean floor just before an earthquake. By the time I reached the parking lot, I was already on the phone, not with a recruiter, with my lawyer. "Hey, Sarah, it's time. Pull up the clause. Clause 17B. We're live. That weekend, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, because I was ready. They thought they were done with me, but I had just started playing. Sarah met me at her office that Sunday morning, hair in a messy bun, legal pads already waiting. She didn't ask questions. She just poured me coffee and said, "Start from the top." I walked her through the Friday massacre. The packet, the clause, the folder I left behind. She didn't interrupt once. Just wrote, fast, clean, the way she always did when her brain switched into predatory mode. When I finished, she tapped her pen twice against the pad, then looked up at me with that slow, calculating lawyer stare I'd seen her use in court when someone was about to get filleted. "Do they know you've seen this clause?" "No," I said. "I buried it on purpose." She raised an eyebrow. "Not out of spite," I added, "out of habit. I've been redlining vendor contracts for a decade. I learned to sneak protection clauses in like vitamins inside toddler food. The COO signed off because it was tied to the supplier exclusivity renewal. No one rereads those if the terms look cheaper." Sarah exhaled through her nose, impressed. "You sneaky bitch, that's why you love me." We spent the next 4 hours drafting memos. Not emails, memos. PDFs with date stamps, metadata, notarized signatures. She walked me through every angle. How the clause functioned, how much weight it carried if triggered, what documentation I had proving ownership of key systems. "Do they have any proof you handed off credentials or sign-off?" she asked. "Nope, you sure?" I pulled out a thumb drive and plugged it into her laptop. A file directory opened, labeled, "System Access Requests 2023 Q4 Empty No Access Tickets," I said. "No written request. No sign-off. No IP handover. They never even asked." She grinned like a pit bull spotting an unlocked gate. "You just became the human version of a dead man's switch." "Good," I said. "Let's make it louder." We built a document chain. Internal logs from my system keys. Slack screenshots showing unanswered queries. A record of the final system push I'd made 2 days before I was let go, with a log trail ending exactly at the moment of my termination timestamp. No follow-up. No delegation. Just a digital cliff. "And this?" Sarah said, opening one more folder marked escrow clause. I nodded. "That's the kill switch." It was all there, the clause from the vendor MSA, the linked exhibit naming me as the operational lead, and the stipulation that any sale of the company's core systems would require one of two things. A, my direct involvement in the transfer, or B, my written and verified documentation of system continuity, signed and approved by the acquiring party. Neither existed. But that wasn't even the twist. The twist was what I'd done years ago, back when they promoted me without a title bump and tried to dump 3 engineers' worth of work on my lap. I'd created a system. A siloed, partitioned backend structure with key integration nodes, each one linked to a personal encryption token I generated under the internal provisioning guidelines. The tokens were revocable, rotating, tied to a master protocol that only I controlled. Not out of malice, not out of paranoia, just protocol. The IT team didn't notice because on paper it all looked standard. And it was technically, but the keys were mine, and without me the system couldn't be re-authenticated after 60 days. One silent timer ticking down, no fireworks, no shutdowns, just inaccessibility. Sarah sat back and exhaled. It's airtight. You didn't sabotage anything. You followed process. Exactly. I documented everything. My approvals, my requests, their silence. She closed her laptop. They think they fired the janitor, but they actually fired the architect holding the blueprints to the panic room. I stood and finished my coffee. What do we do now? She asked. Nothing. Nothing, not until they realized the vault's locked and they tossed the only key out with yesterday's bagels. I left her office with 3 printed packets, one for her, one for my own files, and one sealed in a safety deposit box I hadn't touched in years. Just in case. I didn't post on LinkedIn, didn't gossip with old coworkers, didn't answer the emails that started trickling in from burner accounts with "Hey, just checking in" subject lines. Let them wonder, let them whisper, because eventually someone on the buyer's side would find that clause. And when they did, silence wouldn't save anyone. I didn't have to stalk Valon's Slack channels or bug former coworkers for updates. They made it easy. Too easy. 3 days after my exit, someone in marketing posted a celebratory internal email, Project Horizon, final countdown begins, and because idiots can't help themselves, it somehow leaked to LinkedIn. The post had all the subtlety of a gender reveal party in a fireworks warehouse. Thrilled to be joining forces with one of the leading innovators in enterprise analytics. One executive wrote, complete with a cheesy photo of champagne flutes and the hashtag #stronger together. Stronger together. Without the woman who made half their damn tech stack function like it wasn't running on prayers and expired Oracle licenses. I watched from a distance, quiet, observant, untagged, and unbothered. Valon's LinkedIn turned into a non-stop parade of carefully worded hype. Transformational alignment, exciting transition, synergized collaboration. Translation, we think we pulled this off. In the background, the real chaos was unfolding, due diligence. Sarah warned me this is when the clause hits. She was right. Week 1, nothing. Week 2, the cracks started to show. Valon's legal team began quietly pinging my lawyer's office, just vague, polite requests. Hope you're well? We're doing some legacy system audits and had a quick question about access protocols. Sarah forwarded one with the subject line, informal inquiry, no urgency. She added her own note at the top, translation, code red. Meanwhile, my inbox sat still. No apology, no retraction. No, we may have made a mistake, just silence wrapped in mounting panic. Then came the LinkedIn message. I saw it late one night while scrolling through a job posting for a startup looking for data alchemist, whatever the hell that meant. The sender was a guy named Lee Jacobs, junior analyst, based out of the acquiring company's Chicago office. Subject, quick system question. Message, hi Carolyn. I know you're no longer at Valon, but I'm working on a technical compliance audit and came across some unusual access flags on a few backend modules. Totally routine stuff, just curious if you might be able to help clarify some authorization flows. Would love to chat briefly if possible. I stared at it for a moment, read it again. Smiled, he was fishing. Polite, professional fishing, but fishing nonetheless. He'd been sent by someone higher up to start poking at what didn't make sense. Why certain modules showed no confirmed handoff. Why admin credentials hadn't been reissued. Why the system seemed structurally intact, but functionally sealed off in places. I didn't respond, not because I was cruel, because the terms were already written. Signed, sealed, sitting in the packet they ignored. Another memo leaked the next day, this one more desperate. It wasn't a celebration anymore. It was damage control dressed as optimism. In light of recent technical review delays, final closing has been tentatively pushed to Friday. No cause for concern, just ensuring a smooth, compliant process. Smooth, compliant, sure. The closer they got to that Friday deadline, the more people started noticing the silence. The absence, my absence. I saw the search spike on my GitHub. Someone tried to reset the admin password for a node linked to the legacy analytics bridge. The request bounced, encrypted key required. Guess who had the encryption key? Guess who was never asked to hand it over? I was in the grocery store when Sarah texted me a screenshot from a legal update thread. Legal thread buyer counsel, clause 17b, requires operational continuity certification or explicit sign-off from systems architect Exhibit A. Missing. No handoff documented. Escrow release subject to compliance. I stood there in the middle of the frozen foods aisle, holding a box of toaster waffles, reading that message with all the emotional investment of someone checking the weather. Calm, icy, vindicated, they had their parade, their hashtags, their rooftop drinks. But now, as closing loomed, the numbers weren't aligning. Because you can fake a lot in tech, smile through broken dashboards, put lipstick on spaghetti code, but you can't fake a system handoff. Not when $40 million of escrow is chained to a signature. My signature. Cut the ribbon before they found the scissors. And now they were locked outside, knocking politely, hoping the woman they fired as non-essential might save the day. I turned off my phone and kept shopping, let them sweat. The closing was held in a Croman glass monolith downtown, one of those high-rises that smelled like disinfectant and rich people's mistakes. 42nd floor, long polished table, leather chairs, Sparkling water bottles lined up like soldiers. If you squinted, you might have mistaken it for a peace treaty signing. In reality, it was the financial equivalent of a shotgun wedding. Everyone smiling, everyone lying. Valon's team showed up dressed like they'd already spent the money. Todd wore a gray suit too tight in the shoulders. Devin was there, flipping through a legal pad like he knew what any of it meant. The CFO, Mark Halston, looked like he hadn't slept in days, his tie knotted halfway to strangulation. Opposite them sat the buyer's legal phalanx, three suits, calm and quiet. The kind of quiet that meant they were holding the knife but letting you walk into it yourself. They'd already done the PowerPoint dog and pony show. Everyone had smiled for the photo ops. Handshakes were exchanged. Valon's CEO, Greg Sanders, was practically vibrating with glee. He just sold a clunky, patched-up, 15-year-old company for $250 million and thought he'd gotten away with it clean. Then came the binder. It wasn't grand, no sound effect, no thunderclap. Just a quiet moment where one of the buyer's counsel, middle-aged, glasses, dead calm, reached into his bag, pulled out a thick black binder and slid it across the table to Valon's CFO. Page 5, he said. We're flagging the escrow release. That was it. 5 words, no drama. Just an ice pick to the deal's spine. Todd leaned forward first, eager like a kid hoping to be helpful. Mark beat him to it. His hands shook just slightly as he flipped open the binder. The buyer's lawyer kept speaking, soft, deliberate. There's a clause in your 2018 amended supplier agreement, Master Service Addendum 12C, Clause 17B. It outlines the requirement for escrow release in the event of operational continuity being a material asset in the transaction. Greg blinked. Sorry, what clause? The lawyer turned the binder toward him. A yellow tab marked the page. The clause was highlighted, word for word. In the event of an acquisition wherein Valon Systems' operational backend architecture constitutes a material valuation asset, release of escrowed funds shall be contingent upon either A. Continued involvement of the listed systems architect through transition, or B. Verified documentation of complete system transfer, signed by the listed systems architect and approved by the acquiring party. Exhibit A, attached at the bottom of the page, listed one name, Carolyn Lister. Greg's face didn't change at first, it froze, like his brain was buffering the words. Todd leaned closer, mouth half open like he was watching a magic trick he didn't understand. We haven't received any verification, the lawyer continued, and Miss Lister was terminated prior to the start of due diligence. A long pause, the kind of pause you only get in movies where no one speaks because the air has collapsed. Greg cleared his throat. She left us documentation. I'm sure we can provide. We've reviewed the packet she left, the lawyer said, flipping forward. It was marked pending access agreement. It includes no passwords, no architectural maps, no decryption tokens, no signed confirmation, and no system access was ever granted to your internal replacements. Our auditors flagged this 2 days ago. We waited to see if you'd produce a signed transfer document. He paused, then added, You didn't. Mark looked like he might throw up. Devin actually had the gall to say, Can't we just reset the keys? Lawyer didn't blink. Not without triggering the self-lockout timer embedded in the legacy system's bridge modules, which we believe she also designed. Any attempts to override would violate security protocols and potentially void compliance, and your own logs confirm the last system push came from her credentials. Greg's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The buyer's counsel closed the binder. Our position is clear. Without verified transfer or her re-engagement, escrow will not release. That's $40 million. Held, Mark whispered something. His hands gripped the edge of the table like he was trying to keep the floor from falling out beneath him. And Carolyn, she wasn't there, she didn't need to be. They'd ripped her out like a loose cable, but they never bothered to check what else she was wired to. Now the money was stuck, frozen. A $40 million block of ice with one name carved into its core. Carolyn Lister. And the only thing left to do now was call her. Greg exploded 20 minutes after the binder hit the table. Not at the buyer's lawyer, not at the clause. At his own team. Fix it, he barked. Just fix it. Get IT in here and reissue whatever damn credentials she was using. Like the problem was a locked printer tray. Like a system designed and patched over 14 years by one person could be reset with a password change and a PowerPoint deck. It rushed in 3 people from IT. Mike, Raj, and poor Leela, who looked like she wanted to vanish into the carpet tiles the moment she walked in. Greg was pacing behind them like a man trapped in an elevator, repeating the same phrases in slightly more panicked tones. It's just authentication. Just rotate the token or bypass it or spoof it. I don't care. I want back in. Raj pulled up a command window. His fingers clacked for a minute, then slowed. Looked at Mike? Mike looked at Leela. Then they all looked at the screen like it had just told them it was cursed. Greg slammed a fist on the table. What? Leela, eyes wide, spoke first. It's not that simple. Greg leaned over her shoulder. What do you mean, not that simple? Raj cleared his throat. The integration node's secured by a rotating encryption token. It cycles every 30 days. The current key is tied to a personal certificate from Carolyn's account. When her account was terminated, the chain ended. We can't regenerate a new one without the source certificate. Greg's face turned a color somewhere between mauve and boiled ham. Then roll back the system state, or spoof the cert, or emulate. Mike cut him off, soft but firm. We tried. The system detects external tampering. There's a failsafe that locks the node if any unauthorized access is attempted more than twice. After the second ping, it entered protective mode. It's read-only now. We can't alter anything without the original token, and the backup token's storage was locally housed on her company laptop. Leela added, barely audible, the laptop was wiped on offboarding. Silence. Greg turned slowly to legal. Tell me we can work around this. The lead counsel shook his head. Nope. Attempting to falsify documentation or simulate operational handover violates both the escrow conditions and several regulatory standards the buyer included in their compliance checklist. Any workaround would have to be disclosed. If we do that, the buyer could walk. Walk, Greg repeated like the word had never meant anything before. The buyer's counsel, still seated, arms crossed, offered a calm reply, or demand a full revaluation. He paid based on operational integrity and continuity. If that's now in question, the price will be two. Greg turned back to the IT team. You're saying we have no access? Mike nodded slowly. Not to the system that matters, the bridge module, the one feeding real-time analytics. It's a closed loop now. If she doesn't reissue the token, it stays locked. I don't believe this, Greg muttered. You're telling me one employee, one woman, is holding $40 million hostage? Rod shook his head. No, the clause is, she just happens to be the only person who can satisfy it. Greg stared out the window, jaw clenched, breathing heavy. The room was dead silent except for the faint whir of the AC unit overhead, struggling like the rest of them. Then the buyer's counsel dropped the final nail. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, voice steady. We will not accept duct-taped compliance. No retroactive white papers. No AI-generated documentation. No staged walkthroughs with engineers who didn't build the system. We require the original architect's sign-off or an authenticated keychain that leads back to her. Until then, the escrow funds are frozen, non-negotiable. Greg didn't respond. He didn't scream, didn't flip the table. He just stopped moving. Something behind his eyes fractured then. Not anger, fear, because he'd been so sure, so confident. Carolyn had been invisible to him, a fixture, an appliance. You don't fear the glue, you just scrape it off when you're done. Except this time, the glue held the entire machine together, and now it wouldn't let go. The next 45 minutes were pure, unfiltered collapse. Valon's board was summoned into a side room like cattle being herded toward a slaughterhouse. Phones came out. Suits came off. Sweat formed in patches across chests and underarms. The smell of deodorant giving way to raw, rising panic. CFO Mark Halston stood at the whiteboard, red marker in hand, trying to do damage control with fake math. If we restructure the closing framework, he muttered, maybe we can negotiate down to a 10% temporary hold. Pending, they said no. The legal counsel interrupted, her tone just short of lethal. Not a penny of escrow is moving until Carolyn Lister's signature appears on the handover docs or the keys verify. Nothing. Todd, useless as ever, piped up. Isn't there a way to, I don't know, decouple the legacy system from the deal? Just call it non-material. The buyer's rep, still calm, still devastating, replied flatly. Your valuation claimed the real-time analytics were the core asset. Without it, you're a CRM with fancy fonts. Cold gust of silence swept the room. Greg finally spoke, voice low and cracked. Pull it from the purchase price. Everyone turned to look at him. Mark paled. Wait, what? Greg didn't blink. The 40 million, pull it. Move it into escrow directly. Eat the difference, close the deal. That's a sixth of the total, Mark snapped. And if we don't? Greg shot back. They walk, they revalue. They announce the clause to their investors and we become the punchline of a cautionary tale. You think another buyer's gonna step up after that? A beat. Then we have to close. Mark just nodded, eyes dead. The lawyers began rewriting terms. The buyer's team looked bored, like this wasn't the first time they'd watched a seller eat their own leg to stay alive. Then came the cherry on top. Sarah, my lawyer, had been quiet, observing. She waited until the last signatures were being inked, then casually dropped a folder on the table between Valon's and the buyer's legal teams. Before we proceed with retroactive documentation requests, she said smoothly, please see this formal statement from Miss Carolyn Lister, dated 2 days ago. Mark blinked. Wait, what is? It's a refusal, Sarah said, to sign anything retroactive. She paused, letting that sink in before continuing. She's happy to participate in the knowledge transfer, but only under 3 conditions. She opened the folder and laid it out. Immediate full reinstatement as systems transition lead with protected contract status. A revised base salary matching executive tier compensation. 2% of the total sale value paid direct, not in stock options. There was no yelling, no grand protest, just silence, like someone had sucked all the air out of the glass tower and replaced it with dread. The buyer's lawyer didn't flinch. Just looked at Valon's side. Eyebrows raised. Well, he asked, voice calm. If you want the money, you know the terms. The CFO said nothing. Todd looked like he might cry. And Greg? Greg just slumped in his chair, jaw slack, eyes glassy. A director in the back finally whispered it. Who the hell let her go? No one answered. because the answer was all of them. They let me go when they stopped inviting me to meetings, when they called me redundant, when they wiped my name from the org chart but kept logging into the system I built, thinking it would just run itself forever. They treated me like a part they could swap out. But the system knew better, so did the clause, and now I had leverage. Cold, absolute, signed-in-ink leverage, because they didn't just need me, they owed me. Greg called 3 times, left 2 voicemails, then tried again using his assistant's number. Like I'd be more inclined to pick up if someone else carried his shame for him. I answered on the 4th try, not out of mercy, just timing. I was on my porch with a mug of black coffee and a quiet storm building in the distance. Birds chirped, my dog snored, it was a good morning. Carolyn, he said like he hadn't practiced the name a dozen times before dialing. We're in a situation here. You don't say. He chuckled weakly, like we were old friends swapping awkward stories at a high school reunion. Look, I know things didn't end ideally, but Greg, he stopped. My terms are in the packet I left on my desk. Silence. I let it hang long enough for him to feel every missed opportunity, every ignored Slack message, every skipped meeting where I'd sat quietly keeping his empire duct taped together. Then I ended the call. No threat, no negotiation, just truth. That afternoon, the buyer's lead counsel walked into the boardroom, briefcase in one hand, Carolyn's original envelope in the other. The one I'd left behind on the HR table, marked transition plan, pending access agreement. He laid it flat on the table in front of Greg. This is the only document we recognize, he said. Greg didn't answer. He couldn't. His face was gray now, kind of gray that doesn't come from age or stress, but from realizing you lit your own house on fire, and now the neighborhood's watching it burn. The envelope had never been opened. All this time, it had sat somewhere in a drawer or a pile or maybe just the corner of someone's desk, dismissed as a formality from a non-essential employee. A relic, a parting gift. But inside was the exact same thing I had told every single person would be required. The roadmap, the keys, the continuity protocols, all of it conditional on a signature. Mine, no one forged it, no one substituted it because they couldn't, not legally, not structurally, and not without detonating what was left of the deal, so they opened it finally. And this time they read it, the buyer reviewed the clause again. Aloud, no drama, no gloating, just clinical, precise delivery. Involvement of the listed system's architect or verified. Authenticated sign-off required for full release of escrow. He closed the envelope gently. We won't proceed without her signature. Period. Greg didn't speak. His hands were folded in front of him, knuckles white, jaw clenched so tight you could hear his molars creaking. The rest of the room didn't move, not legal. Not the CFO, not even Todd, who had gone so still it was like his soul had quietly slipped out and taken the elevator down without him. They all knew. They'd cut out the one person who could finish the bridge they were halfway across. They declared me irrelevant, expendable, redundant, but they forgot one thing. Systems don't run themselves, they run on people. And some people leave behind more than just empty desks. Some leave behind landmines, calmly labeled, thoroughly documented, and entirely legal. Greg sat there, pale and broken, as the lawyer slid the envelope back into his briefcase. No one said another word, because there was nothing left to say. She's not essential, he'd said, but the clause and $40 million said otherwise. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.